Resourceful Designer, episode 38, The Many Hats of a Home-Based Graphic Designer.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer Podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now, your host. His preferred units of measurement are picas and points. Mark DeCote.
Welcome back to another episode of Resourceful Designer. Thank you for deciding to spend a little of your time with me as we discuss graphic design. Now, the weekend is fast approaching, and on it, this Sunday, June 26, 2016, they will make the announcements for the Podcast Award winners, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed the Resourceful Designer does come out ahead. But even if it doesn't, I am grateful to have been nominated in the category. So I'll let you know in next week's episode how things turn out. Now, I received a couple of really nice reviews in iTunes this week. One of them from Eamon M. Cavity from the UK. Sorry if I got your name wrong there. It says, I absolutely love this podcast. Mark is clear, concise, and very easy to listen to. I'm ashamed to say I've only recently heard of this podcast, but have managed to find the time to listen to every single episode to date. Thanks a mil. Well, thank you for that great review. And another good review I received from Slovakia. My very first review from Slovakia came in from Selron. It says, this is a great down-to-earth podcast. I always either learn something new, find a new resource, or get inspired. Practical and friendly companion of every graphic designer. Subscribe. Well, thank you for those wonderful reviews. It really warms my heart to read them. Now, if you haven't left a review for the podcast, please visit resourcefuldesigner.com/iTunes, which will take you directly to the page where you can click on the ratings and review tab and leave a review. Now, even if you don't use iTunes or the iTunes app or the podcast app from Apple to listen to your podcasts, it's still a really good idea to go over to iTunes and leave a review just to help the discoverability of the podcast. Now, if you are listening on Stitcher, I have yet to receive a single review on Stitcher. So if you are one of the listeners on Stitcher, and I know there's quite a few of you, please leave me a review. The same for Google Play. I just love getting them. And just on another quick related note, if you are using a podcast app, like I use Downcast and Overcast to listen to my podcasts. If you have an app, something like that, and you're not using Apple's podcast app, can you please just go over to iTunes and click the subscribe button anyways? You can unsubscribe immediately after, but a lot of the ratings and a lot of the rankings on iTunes have to do with the number of subscribers you have. And Apple does not count subscribers if you're subscribing through a different podcast catcher other than their own. So either switch over to the podcast app on the phone and just subscribe. And then once you've subscribed, you can unsubscribe right away. Or go into iTunes on your computer. You can use the same link, resourcefuldesigner.com/iTunes, and then click the subscribe link. And once again, if you don't want to use that method of consuming the podcasts, you can just unsubscribe. And one more thing before I get to the meat of this episode is I just want to remind you, I will be in Chicago on Saturday, July 9th, just exploring the city. And if you happen to be in or around the Chicago area and you want to get together to either walk around the city and look at things, or even if you just want to stop and grab a quick bite or a coffee or something, please send me an email at feedback@resourcefuldesigner.com and we can discuss things. I'd love to meet you. And now, my resource of the week. Now, this week's resource, you may say it's a little bit of a cop-out, but I'm going back to my very own resource, the 4-Week Marketing Boost. Now, this is a guide that I put together that offers quick and simple tasks focused on improving the often overlooked and neglected parts of your own marketing material for your own graphic design business. Now, after completing this 4-week plan, you should be in a better position to win over new clients. Now, this guide is totally free. It's just another way that myself, a resourceful designer, want to help you to streamline your graphic design business and allow you to get back to what you do best, which is designing. So please, if you haven't already downloaded it, visit marketingboost.net, enter your name and email, and the guide will be sent to you, absolutely free of charge. And now, the many hats of a home-based graphic designer. Now, for those of you that are already running your own graphic design business, what I'm going to say in this episode shouldn't really be anything new to you. You're familiar with what it takes to run a graphic design business from home. Now, for those of you who aren't running your own business yet, you may be surprised at just how many hats we have to wear in our business. Now, before I get to that, let me ask you a question. When did you decide to become a graphic designer? Did you know from a really young age that this is what you wanted to do? Did you know another graphic designer that aspired you to follow in their footsteps? Was it art class in high school that you enjoyed so much that you decided to pursue a career in the arts and just chose graphic design as the path you wanted to follow? Maybe this wasn't your ambition from a young age. Maybe this is your second career. Maybe you got tired of all the mundane tasks your regular job had to do and you decided to try something different. Or maybe your company got downsized and you lost your job and you decided this was a good time to switch careers and decided to go back and take some design courses. Or maybe you didn't even go to school for graphic design. Maybe you're one of those many people out there who just one day had some sort of event or something and decided they needed a poster or a flyer for it and sat down at their computer and fiddled around and came up with some design, and after doing so thought, hey, I like doing this. Maybe I can make a living out of this. Which is where a lot of graphic designers these days got their start. They didn't go to school. They weren't formally trained. They just sat down at their computer, gave it a try, and found out that they're good at it. Well, regardless of how you got here, you are now a graphic designer. And that's great. But if you're also running your own graphic design business, then you are so much more than just a graphic designer. Now, my own story on how I became a graphic designer is all laid out in the About Me page at resourcefuldesigner.com. But for those of you that haven't read it yet, I'll give you a quick point form version of how I got here. Now, I'll be honest, I never intended to be a graphic designer. Even when I enrolled in the graphic design program at my local college, I had absolutely no desire of working in this field. You see, back in high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And after graduation, I had two choices. Take a year off from school and do some work, or go back to high school for another year, get a few more credits while I tried to figure out what I wanted to do. Now, I knew myself well enough to know that if I left school and went and started working full-time somewhere, I'd probably never go back to school. So I chose to go back for an extra year of high school. Now, during that extra year, I decided that advertising was something that I would really love to do, specifically creating television commercials. I was always fascinated with television commercials and how they can tell a story in 15, 30, 60 seconds. And I thought I had the creativity that I would be really good at doing something like that. Now, after looking up courses, I realized I didn't have enough money saved up to enroll in university, and unfortunately my parents were not in a position to help me out financially. But what I did have was a very small scholarship to my local college that I had actually won the previous year at my graduation. Now, it wasn't enough to give me a free ride, but it did cover tuition for the first semester and most of the second semester. So, at the advice of my guidance counselor, he suggested I take 1 year of the graphic design program at the local college as I continued to work and save money for university. He told me, after all, if I learned anything in the course, it would probably be benefit to the advertising program that I was aiming for at university. Well, I followed his advice, I enrolled in the graphic design program, and after the first year, I absolutely loved it and decided to stick it out for the remaining 2 years. And at the end of the 3 years at my local college, I graduated top of my class with honors, and the rest, as you can say, is history. I was a graphic designer. Now, if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you've heard me mention many times how I worked for 15 years at a local printer in their design department, where the bulk of my day job was, well, you guessed it, designing. It wasn't until I left there and started my own graphic design studio that I realized just how many hats one has to wear when running a successful business. When I was working at the printing company, there were people there to answer the phones, collect payments from clients, pay bills, make sure the delivery van was serviced, and make sure all the supplies we needed were always stocked up. My job was to sometimes talk to the clients and design their jobs. In an 8-hour day, I could potentially spend 6 to 7 hours of it designing. Now, you can probably guess where I'm going with this. When I finally started on my own graphic design business, there was nobody but me to do all those extra tasks. All of a sudden, all those many hats I keep mentioning were on my head. And to be honest, it was a little overwhelming. So for the benefit of those of you who haven't started your own business yet, I'm going to go over some, definitely not all of them, but I'm going to go over some of the many hats we home-based graphic designers have to wear on a regular basis. And I'm going to divide this up into 5 categories. So the first category is the many hats of running a home-based business. There is so much that goes into running a home-based business, not just a graphic design business, just any home-based business, that a lot of people don't realize. First of all, you're acting as the general manager for the business, meaning you have to deal with just about everything, from zoning bylaws to business licenses, to taxes, to dealing with lawyers and accountants and everything. Not only do you have to deal with people like accountants, you have to be part of an accountant yourself. You may not be doing the final taxes or the final returns and all that stuff, but you have to know enough about accounting to keep track of things and to organize things, make sure that the money coming in is more than the money going out, or you're going to be in trouble. And that's just something any business owner has to do. And those are just some of the prestigious jobs, you could say. I mean, you also are acting as your own secretary and receptionist, answering phones for all sorts of stupid reasons. I'm not just talking about clients, but when you're running a business, and especially if you have a registered business, people get your phone number from all sorts of places and call you up for all sorts of reasons. And then all the accounting and all the paperwork and licenses and all that stuff all has to be taken care of. So that's when you're doing the secretarial work and filing stuff and organizing things, as well as working on logistics, making sure that everything gets done on time, gets where it has to be, in order for your business to run like a smooth machine. And to top it all off, chances are you're also your own cleaning staff, which means it's your job to keep your working environment organized and tidy. So there are many hats to running a home-based business, whether it's a graphic design business or not, that people don't often think about when they're not running their own home-based business. But now let's focus a little bit closer on the graphic design business. And I'll start off with the many hats involved with procuring new work and new clients. Whenever you're running your own home-based graphic design business, you have to act as a salesperson, because not every client that calls you up is already sold that you're going to be doing the work. You have to be able to sell them on your skills, your ability, and what you can bring to them. So you have to have skills in sales. And that also applies to cold calling or meeting people through random encounters or networking events. You're constantly having to sell your business, so you're acting as a salesperson. Now, while you're meeting all these people, another hat you're wearing is that of a public speaker. Back in episode 19 of the podcast, I talked about your communication skills. You can hear that one at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 19. And I talked about how if you don't have the confidence and authority as you speak, which comes from public speaking, people aren't going to take you seriously as a business person. Now, aside from dealing with clients and speaking to them and trying to sell to them, you're also your own marketer. It's up to you to come up with a fancy website and good-looking business cards and other promotional materials that you may use for your business. Not to mention ways to get your business name out there. Do you sponsor local events? Do you buy Facebook ads? Do you have your business name wrapped around your vehicle? Now, once you start negotiating with clients in order to procure work, that's when you have several other hats you have to wear. That of an interviewer. Because you're not just having a conversation with the client. When you're taking on a new client, you are interviewing that client. Because not every client is for you. You have to determine whether or not the job they're bringing to you and the client itself is somebody you want to work with. So even though you're not actually hiring them, you're still conducting an interview with them. So you have to have skills in order to weed out the clients and the work that really won't benefit your business or you. Now, once you do weed those out and you do get some jobs, then you wear the hat of an estimator, because a lot of clients will want to know what the job's going to cost them up front. So now you have to be able to look at the project, the scope of the job, and come up with an accurate price, or at least a good ballpark figure, in order to get them to sign the contract with you. And during all this process, the other hat you wear is that of a sounding board, because a lot of clients will come to you not with a definitive job that they have in mind, but maybe an idea or even a problem to solve, which in my opinion is some of the best clients to have, is when they don't really know what they want. They just have a problem they need solved, and they come to you. And that's when you act as a sounding board. They tell you the problems and you kind of help them, mold them, and guide them in the direction that you think would be best for their business. And you can use your experience and your skills as a designer in order to persuade them and lead them in the right direction. And finally, when it comes to procuring work, you have to act as the human resource person for your business. Meaning if you're taking on a job that you're not able to handle 100%, it's your responsibility to find people that'll handle the parts that you can't. So if you're not an illustrator and you need some illustrations, you're the one that has to find the illustrator. If you're building a website and the code or there's something about it that's beyond your skills, you have to find the right person to do that. Same thing with copywriters, editors, all sorts of different positions that maybe you can't or shouldn't be doing. Well, you're acting as a human resource person in order to find the right people for the job. So those are some of the hats that you would wear when you're trying to procure new work or new clients. So now that you have those clients, the third group of hats that I want to talk about is dealing with the clients. Back when I was at the printing company, I often acted as art director. Sometimes I would deal with the client, discuss the job, and then it was me working on it from start to finish. Sometimes there would be somebody else involved and they would kind of discuss everything with the client and then come to me and say, this is what's required. And then I would just follow the instructions that were given to me. But when you're on your own, you definitely do act as art director in deciding how the job is going to go about, what aspects need to be done when, where, by whom, and managing all the logistics of getting the job from start to finish. That's what you do as an art director. Now, another hat you wear when dealing with clients is that of a presenter, because once you come up with your design, you do have to present this design to your client. And whether that's a presentation in person, in which case, going back to number 2, where I mentioned public speaking would come in definitely handy here. Or maybe you're doing a video. I often do that whenever I'm showing a new website or a new product to a client who's not local. I'll do a screen capture video or do a video presentation to show them. And I use software called ScreenFlow for that. If you want to know more, visit resourcefuldesigner.com/screen capture. But presenting also comes to the way you form your emails. If you're just sending a proof to somebody and you want them to know something, it's how you compose the email or the instructions you put right on the proof. Sometimes when I'm creating a PDF or something to send to a client, I'll put instructions right on the page next to the proof for them to notice little things or ignore something that, maybe a photo that we were going to swap out at a later date in the process. I'll leave that instruction saying this is not the final photo or this is a low res image that's just a placeholder. That's the sort of stuff that you have to do while you're presenting. Now, of course, if you're into web design and all that, another thing with dealing with clients is you act as IT support. Chances are your client's going to come back to you with some sort of question about their website or about their login or about whatever, and you have to act as IT support to them. Now, if it doesn't have to do with their website or anything like that, then chances are it turns into customer support. And that could be for many different reasons. Maybe the client is missing something or they need a certain version of the file that you sent them. Maybe you gave them the logo and they have somebody that insisted that they have a TIFF file as opposed to a JPEG file. And of course, the client has no idea what that means. So they call you and you, wearing the customer support hat, then goes in, creates the TIFF file if it's not already created, and sends that off to them. Now, when dealing with clients, another hat you would often wear is that of a troubleshooter. And sometimes that kind of ties in with being an art director and logistics and all that stuff, sometimes with human resources. But being a troubleshooter could be as simple as trying to figure out a way to get a job done for a certain date because there's some sort of presentation the client is doing or some sort of event they're putting on. And you trying to deal with printers or other suppliers for different things in order to try to get it done. And sometimes it means paying extra for rush jobs or whatever. Or sometimes a client will get a job afterwards and they may not be happy with something. I did a print job for a client, and when they got it, they were not happy with the way it was run. They said the colors were off on the print job. And I had to act as a troubleshooter, dealing as a go-between between the client and the printer because I acted as a print broker. I had to deal with the printer and try to get to the bottom of it and see if we can either get a discount for the client because the colors were off or have the job redone. So there's always that chance of you wearing the hat of a troubleshooter. And then finally, in some cases, you're wearing the hat of a delivery man. As I said, I deal with print brokering and stuff like that. When I do that, there's often times where I will go personally pick up the job at the printer and deliver it to the client. Now, sometimes if it's a local printer, I'll have them deliver it directly to the client. But there's sometimes where I'll get a job printed elsewhere and have it shipped to me, in which case, then I have to deliver it to the client. So at that point, the hat I'm wearing is that of a delivery man. Now, again, there are many more hats you could be wearing when dealing with clients, but I'm going to leave it at just those ones. The fourth group of hats I want to talk about is those that you wear when you're actually working on your clients' jobs. Now, the obvious one here is you're finally wearing the hat of a graphic designer or web designer if you're doing a website. But we've already gone through 3 sections: that of running your business, that of finding new work and new clients, that of dealing with the clients, and now finally working on the job before the hat you put on is finally that of a graphic designer. But even then, while you're working on the job as a graphic designer, there are other hats that you put on as well. You have to be a researcher. You have to be a code writer. Sometimes you're a copywriter. Sometimes you're an editor. You're definitely a time tracker, or you should be a time tracker, keeping track of everything. If you're working on websites, maybe you are a quote-unquote SEO expert. Now, yes, you can hire all sorts of people when you put back on that human resource hat and coordinate all this stuff. And yes, some of this stuff does fall under art direction. But when you're actually working on the job, there's a lot of these things that come into play. You're not just graphic designing. As we know, research is a huge part of the job. And in some cases, if you were working at an agency, that research would be done by a different team than the actual designer working on the job. Sometimes it's the art director, or the art director would assign somebody to do the research, and then maybe somebody else will be doing the actual design. But when you're running your own home-based business, you're doing it all. From page layout to color selection, choosing images and stock photos, dealing with photographers in order to take photos, dealing with copywriters. Sometimes you are dictating to them how much copy is required because of the space given in the design. It shouldn't be the other way around. If you only have enough space to put in 300 words of text and they give you 600 words, it's up to the copywriter to do something about that. But in some cases, if the client is dealing with you directly and you don't have a copywriter or somebody to do photo manipulation or whatever, then all those hats fall upon you. I know there's many jobs where the clients will give me text and I'll look at it and I'll read their text. First of all, sometimes their text is really atrocious and I'll tell them so. But there's other times where I might change something. They'll tell me a headline for something and I'll look at it and I'll think of a better headline. And I know some people listening might be thinking, oh, you really do this? But yeah, sometimes the client will give me a headline and I'll change the headline on them. And I'll say, I think this is a better headline. And I've been doing this long enough that a lot of the times the client says, you know what, you're right. Or sometimes the client is not very skilled at copywriting and I have to help them out. Now, I'm not saying I'm a super copywriter. I know a little bit about what I'm doing, but I'm no professional. But there's a lot of times when I'll read the copy that a client gives me and I know I can do better than what they have. And depending on the job, if there's no budget involved to actually hire somebody to look over or to write the copy, then copywriter is one of the hats that I wear, along with editor if the stuff is supplied and it's just me going through it. And those are just a tip of the iceberg of the hats that you wear while you're actually working on the job. I mean, we could name color coordinator, illustrator, font chooser. If it's a print job, maybe you're also selecting stocks, choosing finishing options. There are so many hats that you can wear while working on an actual job for a client. Now, the fifth and final group of hats that I want to talk about today is what happens after your job is completed. And at this point, you're kind of going back to running your business and you're doing bookkeeping, where you're invoicing the client, collecting their money, making sure the money is being deposited in the bank, keeping track of deposits on jobs and paid retainers, following up on unpaid bills, keeping track of expenses that go along with a job, and all that fun stuff. Now, once the bookkeeping hat comes off, then you put the archivist hat on, because it's now your job to keep track of these files and make sure that they're saved in a way that 1, 2, 3, 4 years down the road, should something come up, they should be easily accessible and findable. Because your graphic design business could become a real nightmare if you don't have a way of keep tracking of older files. In fact, I talk about this back in episode 22 of the podcast, all about file management for graphic designers. Now, once that's all said and done, you might have to do some customer support roles. If you just designed a brand new WordPress website and the client is all gung-ho to start working on their blog or something like that, and they forget how to do something, they might call you up and then you have to do some customer support and walk them through how to publish or how to edit their blog post if they noticed an error in it afterwards. Now, I personally try to limit some of this stuff by creating videos, again, using ScreenFlow. And whenever I create a new website for a client and there's any part of the website that they're going to be doing on their own, instead of explaining to them, I just quickly do a screen capture video showing me walking through the process so that if they have any questions 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road, they can just refer back to that video and say, oh, that's how he did it. Okay. And then not bother calling me. But inevitably, there'll always be some sort of customer support you have to do after the job. And of course, another hat that you have to wear after completing the job is that of continuing to network with the client and follow up after the job. If you're not following up after you finish a job for a client, you're losing out big time. You got to think, if a client hires you to do a specific job, say they hire you to do a flyer or a poster or a website, and then once that job's done, if they don't hear from you again, the next time they have a job come up, there's not a guarantee that they're going to call you. They might start shopping around again. But if you follow up and keep in contact with them, make sure that they're happy with the website. If they had a poster for a special event, mark it in your calendar and call them up after the event and just say, hey, I was just curious. I know the event passed. How did it go? I'm just curious. Did you get a good turnout? Were people impressed with the speakers you had? How much money did you raise for your charity? Or whatever it is. But just that simple follow-up after the fact can help you get more jobs from that client in the future, even if by referral. When somebody's looking for something, that client will remember, hey, this person cared enough that even after I paid them and the job was done, they called me up to ask me about my event. They asked me about my flyers, my website, or whatever. This person cared enough that I'm going to share their name with people who need a similar service. So please don't discount the follow-up after a job. And the continued networking. When you go to events and you're networking, if you see one of your clients, take the time to go say hi to them. I've been to several networking events where somebody will be looking around and go, oh, there's so-and-so. And I say, oh, who's that? She says, oh, they're one of my clients. And I said, well, do you want to go over and say hi? No, I'm trying to pick up new clients. I don't need to talk to them. Well, they are missing out on a huge opportunity because you don't know what's going through that client's mind and whether they're thinking of a new job and maybe they just met another designer that really impressed them and they're thinking, maybe I'll give this next job to that person instead. So never give up an opportunity to go say hi or to meet one of your clients. I know every time if I'm walking through the mall or doing groceries and I come across one of my local clients, it doesn't matter what sort of rush I'm in. I will stop for a minute or two to talk to them and see how they're doing and remind them that I'm there, and if they need me, they can reach out. So those are just a couple of the hats that you wear as a home-based graphic designer after the job is completed. Now, for those of you out there who do run your own home-based graphic design business, you're probably saying to yourself now, well, Mark, you forgot this or you forgot that. And I know there are tons and tons of hats that you could be wearing or that you should be wearing in your business. But I just wanted to touch on some of them just to give the point that when you're running a home-based graphic design business, you are much more than just a graphic designer. Now, I would love your opinion on what other hats, stuff that I missed or stuff that you do in your business that is not graphic design that you think maybe I should have mentioned in this list. Please head on over to resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 38 and leave a comment there telling me what other hats that you wear in your business that I did not include in my list. So all in all, running a home-based business is not for everyone. It takes a lot of hard work and dedication to make it succeed. But the rewards are tremendous if you are good at it and stick with it. And in the end, wearing all these many hats do justify themselves. I mentioned at the beginning that when I was working at the printing company, I'd do 6 or 7 hours a day of design out of an 8-hour day. And I was paid an hourly wage working for those 8 hours. Now, when I started my own business, because I was able to charge much more than what I was being paid on an hourly rate at the print shop, and once you take into consideration government deductions and that sort of thing that come off your pay, I calculated that all I had to work was roughly about 3 billable hours per day to match and sometimes exceed the salary I was getting at the print shop, where I was designing for 6 or 7 hours a day. Now, that doesn't mean I get to slack off the rest of the day. That means for the remaining hours that I'm working, I have that extra time to try on and wear all these many hats that I've been talking about. Because as any home-based graphic designer can tell you, there will be many days where you will put in an 8-9 hour day and at the end of it realize that you only have 1, 2, or 3 billable hours for that day. The rest of your time was spent working on, around, for your business, wearing all these many, many hats. So that was my topic for this week's episode. As I said, if there are other hats that you think I should have mentioned, please leave a comment for me on the show notes page at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 38. I would love to hear from you. And now, my question of the week. And this week's question comes in from Gretchen. She says, a question that's been bouncing around in my head for quite some time now is how can I determine the results of my work aside from being a quote-unquote nice design? It's a little easier to quantify when creating things such as websites, but I mainly do print design. It seems like there are just far too many variables. I would like to add something more concrete to my portfolio descriptions. Well, thanks for sending in your question, Gretchen. That is tough when you're doing print design. It is hard to, as you say, quantify the results of your work. When you're doing a website, you've got stuff like analytics that can tell you whether or not something's working. Now, that isn't always the case because you can design the most beautiful website in the world. But depending on the SEO and how your client is actually using the website and marketing the website, it might not do them any good, in which case the analytics, when you're looking at them, might show you that beautiful website you designed might not be getting the hits that you thought it would. But as far as it being nice design, the easiest thing to tell is whether or not the client comes back. If you design something for a client and they seem happy with the job, if they pay the job quickly, and especially if they contact you afterwards to do more work, then you know that you did a good job on the print design. Or if you get a referral and you hear that it's from such and such a client, then you can tell that whatever you did for that client was good enough for them to recommend you, which is a huge feather in your cap. But the thing about graphic design, or any design in that matter, is the results are subjective. One person might absolutely love your work and somebody else might hate it. I know my wife likes watching those home design shows on TV where they take an old house and they renovate it and then try to sell it, or take somebody's house and try to spruce it up before they put it on the market to sell. Well, some of the designs these people come up with are absolutely gorgeous. I love them. And yet some of the other interior designs that they do, I wouldn't be caught dead living in a house that looked like that. But even though I don't like the design, I can look at it and realize that it is good design. It's just not my style. And that's the same thing when it comes to print design. It's very subjective. One client might really like something and another client might not. I remember once, years ago, I had designed a business card for a client and the client thought it was horrible. I was so proud of the design and couldn't wait to show the client. And when they saw it, they completely tore it apart, thinking it was a horrible design, and ended up designing something completely different for them, which they did end up liking. But I liked that design so much that it just so happens the next client I had, I was able to take that design and make one small tweak to it. I mean, I changed the company name and that, but overall it was the same design. And when I showed it to the second client, they absolutely loved it. And they kept going on and on about what a wonderful design it was. And all I had really done was change the company name. And there was no logo per se. It was more of a fancy design element I included. I had just altered it a little bit so that it was more in line with their business as opposed to the previous business. But the overall layout of the card and the design of it, they absolutely loved, where the first client hated it. So as I said, design is very subjective. So what I'm trying to do here, Gretchen, in answering your question, is just let you know that if you think it's good design, include it in your portfolio. It really doesn't matter what your client thinks. If it's something you're proud of, include it. I just recently did a logo for some gentleman, and I told him when the logo was done, I had one that I thought was the perfect logo for him. And to be honest, he showed it to a bunch of people and they all agreed, but he really liked one of the other logos I had done, even though everybody he showed it to said, no, they didn't really care for that logo. He had something about that logo that he really liked. And at the end, he chose the logo he wanted for his business. And that was great. And I told him, I says, I'm happy for you, but just to let you know, I'm going to use option 3 in my portfolio because that's the one I'm proud of. And he was fine with that. And it's the one that I want to show off. When I'm showing stuff to other clients, I'm more proud to show that third logo I designed, even though the first logo was the logo the client ended up choosing. So don't be afraid to put whatever you want in your portfolio because you like it. As far as your portfolio descriptions, again, when it comes to websites, you can easily say, yes, I designed this website and we saw 150%, 200% uptick in traffic or conversion rates or whatever. And it's pretty hard to do that with print design. So normally what I would do in a portfolio is instead of saying what was accomplished because of your design, you flip it and you say what the design was supposed to accomplish. So if you created a printed brochure in order to attract more investors in something, or maybe it's for a charity to attract more donations for the charity, instead of saying like you would on the website that creating the website, we ended up increasing donations by X amount of dollars, you just say in your description on your portfolio that this was created in order to attract more people. You don't have to say whether or not it worked. You just give the description of why this piece was created. What was the process you went through in order to create it? Why the client came to you? Why you chose the decisions that you did? And here's the piece you came up with. And let the viewer that's looking at your portfolio decide for themselves whether they think it works or not. So that's how I go about it with my portfolio. And I think that's a good way for other people to do it as well. When it comes to print design, it's very, very hard to determine what sort of results were achieved because of it. So instead, just write your description stating what sort of results were expected or hoped for. So I hope that answers your question, Gretchen. Now, if you would like to submit your question for a future episode of the podcast, please visit resourcefuldesigner.com/feedback, where you can leave your comments and questions there. Now, in next week's episode of the podcast, I'll be talking about time management and your graphic design business. I want to remind you of my resource of the week this week, which is my very own 4-week marketing boost, my guide to help you create the best first impression you can and help you attract new clients. Now, you can get that by visiting marketingboost.net, or if you are in the US, you can text Marketing Boost, all one word, to 44222. Now, until next week's podcast, you can visit resourcefuldesigner.com/iTunes and leave me a review on iTunes. Or if you are listening on Stitcher or Google Play, you can also leave me a review there. You can follow me on Twitter at ResourcefulD or on Facebook at facebook.com/resourcefuldesigner. So that wraps up another episode of the podcast. Thank you so much for sticking around, and I wish you all the best in your graphic design business. I am Mark Dacote, reminding you to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer Podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.